We've been doing a series of advocacy meetings around this film. Human Rights Watch has been documenting abuses by the LTTE and by government security forces in Sri Lanka over 2 decades now. During the final stages of the conflict, we were able to document testimonies from victims, from eyewitnesses. We've analysed many photographs, video footage, satellite imagery, and we can confirm a number of the incidences that you're about to see in this quite horrific documentary that's been pulled together of various executions. I won't actually talk about the human rights abuses because I think the film really speaks for itself in terms of what we want. There's been a failure of the Sri Lankan government to have any kind of effective domestic accountability mechanism. The Sri Lankan government knows about a lot of these abuses. Human Rights Watch and other human rights groups have brought these abuses to the attention of the Sri Lankan government for 2 years now. But we have still not seen any credible efforts to investigate or hold the perpetrators of these abuses accountable.
I want to say thank you for coming tonight. I know Rathika and John and myself all thought it was very important that we played this video here on Parliament Hill because it really is powerful and it really highlights the atrocities that occurred. And I know we all feel very strongly that we can't allow atrocities like this to go on, and that justice needs to be found. And here on Parliament Hill, we can certainly advocate that position. I've got engaged in this issue over the last few years because of a Tamil family in Barrie, and actually Aaron Suresh Kumar is here today. He drove up from Barrie and told me about what happened to his family in Sri Lanka, and I know there is thousands and tens of thousands of stories like that of Canadians who have loved ones that have faced incredible violence and death in many cases in Sri Lanka, and we need to highlight what happened and shine it everywhere we can. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for coming.
I'll make it extremely brief. May I say welcome on behalf of my colleagues in the Liberal Party, and I'm very pleased to see good representation from all parties on the Hill. It's actually kind of unusual to have this kind of a level of interest, and I think that's a real testimony to the fact that this is an important story that needs to be told. And I want to congratulate Human Rights Watch on the courage to not only obtain the footage, but also to broadcast the footage. I know you've had some serious difficulties in doing that, and I think it's up to all of us to make sure that this story gets told, and that Canada has an appropriate and effective reaction. So thank you very much.
I just want to also, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Radhika Sitsavais. I'm the member for Scarborough Rouge River. I am a Sri Lankan-born Tamil, and so this story, or some of the horrific events you'll see here or everything you'll see in this video is a story of my people, my sisters and brothers, my cousins. This is my history. And so this is very close to my heart, and I really thank all of you for coming tonight, and I thank Patrick, John, and Elaine, and all of Human Rights Watch for all the hard work that you've been doing. It's very important for me that this is actually happening, that we're able to have a screening on the Hill, and that we have a full house here tonight. Really means a lot for me, so thank you very much. And I know it means a lot for the Tamil community in Canada. We are over 300,000 strong in the GTA alone. And I know
among the thousands who flocked here, encouraged by that promise, were doctors, nurses, patients whose hospitals have been destroyed in the fighting.
Just inside the no-fire zone, they set up this emergency hospital. A makeshift arrangement of beds and mattresses in an abandoned primary school.
It was clearly marked, with red crosses on the roof, which gave it protection under international law. Large number of soldiers and Tamil civilians in this government centre for the displaced.
A house with just a few equipments and just like dead bodies on the floor. Everything happened outside, and blood from the dead bodies or just running with the rainwater.
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, Human Rights Watch, International Crisis Group, the US State Department, the UN panel of experts have all documented these very gross abuses of human rights. There has been a recommendation, there's been a persistent recommendation to the Sri Lankan government to set up a genuine accountability mechanism. 2.5 years later, despite the fact that this footage has existed for quite some time, we've seen absolutely zero interest from the Sri Lankan government in actually moving towards any criminal prosecutions. So really what we need is an international independent investigation. The UN panel report came out in April of this year. We've had several missed opportunities at the Human Rights Council when the matter could have been raised. Just 2 weeks ago, Ban Ki-moon actually did refer the report to the UN Human Rights Council. So now there is the possibility for any member state to raise questions about why there hasn't been any accountability, and to push for this at the next session of the Human Rights Council, to push for an independent commission of inquiry. I just want to say one word about, one of the responses that we've had from member states when we've raised this issue is that often they're waiting to see what will happen with the domestic inquiry. Because it's true that when human rights violations like this happen, it is first the primary responsibility of the state in question to hold the abusers accountable. But in Sri Lanka, we've seen over the last 30 years that whenever they come under pressure to investigate human rights violations like this, they simply set up some kind of a government commission. In the past, there's been 14 commissions of inquiry set up by the government of Sri Lanka, and none of these commissions have led to any tangible result in terms of identifying the perpetrators or holding the perpetrators accountable. The LLRC is no different. It doesn't have the mandate to investigate serious allegations of war crimes such as this. It's simply been a delaying tactic. It's kicked the release of its report down the road. Now it's November 15th is the date that the government is saying that they're going to release the LLRC report. But we have no idea whether that means that the report will even be made public. 1 year ago, it made some preliminary recommendations. None of those recommendations had anything to do with justice and accountability. So we have absolutely no faith in the LLRC as a mechanism of justice and accountability. And we're really calling on the Government of Canada to show leadership on this issue and really to mobilise, not only the other Western countries that have expressed concern, but also to be talking to, India, Indonesia, Japan, other countries around the world to really ensure that there is sufficient momentum for action at the Human Rights Council to set up a commission of inquiry. You might wonder, what is the difference between a commission of inquiry and the previous UN report that we've already had? The difference with a commission of inquiry is it will be a fact-finding mechanism. It will seek to identify names, to name names of the perpetrators of these violations with a view to holding them accountable. And if the Sri Lankan government is not going to initiate those investigations, then that will be a process through the International Criminal Court. But obviously we're a few steps away.
I just want to comment on the fact that we have a petition that we started, that the community is out there passing around, and I'd ask anybody who can to join in the petition. But the petition is calling on our government to use its influence at the United Nations to follow through on the investigation and to ensure that there's some justice in this. This is pretty clear evidence that we've just seen, and there's more evidence, of course, than what has been compiled in this story. As a member of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, it's my intention to raise in that subcommittee that we undertake this move if we can't get reaction from the government on the petition. And I certainly would hope that other parties, Mr. Brown's already been involved here, that they talk to their members on the Subcommittee for Human Rights to support that, so we can start moving this forward. I certainly would appreciate it.
Now, after watching the video, what came to your mind?
Well, it's very clear from the footage that we've seen, the evidence has been gathered, that there should be an investigation into the crimes committed by both sides in that particular conflict. There were crimes against the people of Sri Lanka, against the Tamil community. It was very evident. And so I'm sure that as this word spreads, then people come to understand the severity of what happened. And in the tactical efforts made to corral people, to put them at risk, is very clear to my mind that there was a strategy in play here, and I'm very troubled by that. I will be raising this at our Subcommittee on Human Rights and asking that committee to make a presentation to the government to encourage them, to encourage the United Nations to follow through on something.
You know, it's very difficult to describe, Raghavan, obviously, the things that we see in this movie. It's very, very unfortunate that it has to get to that level, but we all understand that this has really hit the community really, really hard, and people that are responsible for these actions ultimately needs to be held accountable, and they need to be brought to justice.
Yeah. This is incredibly disturbing, and I think what it says to all Canadians is we have a responsibility to galvanize our government to act on behalf of human rights. The atrocities that took place over the period of a few months are atrocities that the international community has to be concerned about, and Canada has to have a very strong voice in international affairs so that we get the inquiry that is needed, an independent human rights inquiry, so that we can find out what happened, and those who are guilty should have the sanctions and be punished.
So what was your first reaction, or what did you feel when you watched this movie?
Very moved. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I'm a teacher. And I found the atrocities that we witnessed were just heart-wrenching. It was very difficult to sit there and to sit next to somebody like Radhika, who experienced fleeing from Sri Lanka herself when she was a little girl. You could just live the pain and agony that everybody must have been feeling, and yet it was so horrific. Even though I've seen the visual images, I cannot even pretend to imagine what those women, children, and men must have gone through.
Well, I have watched this video many times before the documentary. I've been talking about the situation in Sri Lanka and the atrocities that have been going on, the human rights violations in our NDP caucus meetings for many weeks and months. So when I spoke to the rest of my caucus and told them that I am co-hosting it and that we need to ensure that there's a good NDP presence, people were willing to come and really wanted to understand. And I was like, I articulated the importance of them understanding what it is that I speak about all the time. This really gives my colleagues the visual and visual understanding of what it is that our people have gone through for so long and continue to go through on a regular basis, unfortunately, still today.
Well, it was very difficult to watch. It was absolutely horrific, and as human beings, it's very clear that we've failed. We've failed the innocent, we've failed the vulnerable. And I can recall at the time of this travesty of the invasion of the lands held by Tamils, I have constituents who came to my office, and they had pictures and they had stories, and they said, please go to Ottawa and plead with our government. Tell our Prime Minister that he is the Prime Minister of all of us, and that includes the Tamil community of Canada.
Now, lately there seems to be a heightened awareness, and even Canada's government seems to be taking proactive steps in saying Sri Lanka needs to be held accountable. Where do you see yourself as a member sitting on the opposite side of the government? How far do you think you can push this towards the satisfaction to the or towards an international investigation into what happens in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think all members of Parliament have a responsibility. When there's violations, systematic violations of human rights on the scale of what we saw in northern Sri Lanka, all of us as members of Parliament have a responsibility to speak out. And I think it's quite good that tonight we had members of Parliament from all parties. That shows there is deep concern regardless of your party stripe. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of human rights and justice. Canada has to speak out, and Canada has to be a very strong voice, because we cannot allow these crimes to be committed with impunity. So I'm hoping with the government members that were here tonight that they will be following up and they will be pushing their government to do the right thing. We certainly on the NDP side of the House will be a very strong voice, a very passionate voice for human rights and justice in Sri Lanka.
Work very closely with Radhika and our human rights critic, and really push for the Canadian government to be a loud voice, This is not a time to sit quietly and waiting for Sri Lanka to do the right thing. They have demonstrated they cannot do the right thing. So now it is time for, as opposition, we will push hard, we will push over and over again until this gets addressed. Canada's had a proud history of being a loud voice for human rights issues. And if we don't speak up now, then we are guilty. Because Mandela once said, those who watch atrocities and don't speak up are just as guilty as those who commit the atrocities. And I really feel that all the parliamentarians really need to use their voices now to make sure that this Prime Minister takes some decisive action.
Do you think there's a better awareness within the House of Commons, the caucuses, that something really happened in Sri Lanka and there was reason why the Tamil people were actually out on the streets?
Absolutely. I think tonight itself is a huge step forward. We all hear things and, sometimes we talk to our friends and stuff, but it doesn't really hit you the extent that the magnitude that it has an effect on the community and on the country. But when you see it with your own eyes firsthand, the image is very, very different.
My name is Elaine Pearson. I'm the Deputy Asia Director at Human Rights Watch.
Now, Elaine, you must have been working on this for a very long time, trying to bring about an awareness. And as members of media, we're able to see that lately there's been some awareness amongst Canadians and the Canadian government and in the US for that matter as well. But do you see a stumbling block that's preventing Western governments from saying what you want them to say?
Well, I think the Sri Lankan government has been on such a diplomatic offensive, and that's been the major stumbling block, is that they've been very successful in putting pressure on, particularly the non-aligned movement, many developing countries, to sort of paint this as some kind of Western conspiracy. Mm-hmm. But I think when you watch, the very hard video evidence of these abuses, you can't deny that, such serious human rights violations took place. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that governments like Canada actually try and get on board other countries, countries like Japan, Indonesia, Korea, that would help to sort of mobilize a bit more of an international effort for an international investigation.
It is now more than 2 years since these Tamil civilians besieged the UN, pleading for the international community to stay and witness their plight. That community failed them, and many of them died. The survivors are now looking to the international community for justice. Will they be failed again?